It's actually a very famous stadium in Chicago where I make my home in the States these days whenever I'm home. And that stadium is very famous. And that game is what we call the American game, baseball. So I want you to imagine for a minute that you're with me at the stadium. Think about being there, and in baseball we're trying to get men around that diamond and into home base so we can score points. So imagine with me, if you will, that my Chicago Cubs, who have never ever won a World Series, are in the last game of the World Series. They're down by 2 points. They have 3 men on those bases, and all they need is 1 hit. That's the difference between winning and losing. Their first ever championship. But they have 2 outs, and if the batter at the bat gets put out, the game's over, and history repeats itself. History repeats itself, and the Chicago Cubs go home losers again. Now, nobody in Chicago will mind. They've been losing forever, right? But the guys on the field care, and the coach cares. So we're going to send in our new star athlete. We're going to try to change this game. So we send in our next batter, if you can. Okay? We've heard this guy's pretty good. He's a pretty good batter. I think he can change the game. But it's a different game now, isn't it? The same thing has been happening in the world. We have countries that have developed, become very successful, huge economies. We're going to talk about that a little bit. But we also have countries like India that are growing. They're gaining ground in the world marketplace. They're looking to turn the world order around. And I want to look real quickly, and we're going to go through a short history of where the world's at right now. If we look at the economies of the world, we look at some of the factors that are at play in our world. So let's look at the next slide here. Quick look at the world today. One more. Next slide, please. So this is an index on innovation that was put together by GE. And the idea was to look at which nations have the most innovation, who's creating the most ideas, the most new products, the most new services. Where does that innovation happen? And as you can see, there's the countries we would expect near the top there today, and by wide margins. Where do we see India? We see it there in the middle, but it's still a fairly small number in terms of innovation. This is an area where India can continue to change the game, can continue to grow, innovating new products and services. Let's go to the next slide. 2 clicks, please. Ease of doing business. As an entrepreneur, ease of doing business is a very important question. Because if you're trying to start a business, the last thing you want to do is spend all your time trying to deal with the government, trying to deal with the regulations and all the other things that are put up as impediments to getting your business running. Taxes and other things that you have to deal with. Now you need to do those things, but the easier it is to do them, the easier it is to run a business. The easier it is to focus on the things that matter, that are going to make a difference in the world. So again, let's look at the top 10 there. Not a lot of surprises on that list. India is currently ranked about 132 on that index. Let's look at the next one. As important as it is to know how to, or to be able to run your business, you have to be able to start it. And starting it is another factor. So ease of starting a business. Again, many of the same countries there. What makes it easy to start a business? It's easy to get registered. In some countries, you can register a new business in less than an hour. Okay? In India, it took me 4 months when we started our business. And a lot of money. India is ranked at 166 today in terms of being able to start a business by this index that was put together by GE. Let's look at the next one. GDP stands for Gross Domestic Product. How much revenue does a country make in a given year? And you can see there, India is ranked number 11. Not bad, right? Be 11 amongst 190, 200 plus countries. That's a good place to be. There's only one problem. Let's look at the next slide. If we look at how many people there are in India today, how many is it? Depends on who's counting, right? About 1.2 billion people. So when we take it and we look at it in terms of revenue per person, right? Earning potential of a person within the country, India ranks much lower, about 140. So there's huge potential because when you have 1.2 billion people, you have a capacity to generate revenue, a capacity to create ideas that exceeds any on the planet. 1 in every 6 people on the planet are an Indian. That's a lot of innovation potential, a lot of earning potential, a lot of ideas that can be generated. Let's look at the next one. Global Fortune 500. We often use this as a measure of, how good has the economy been? Well, how many big companies are based in that country? As you can see right now, it's very slanted. But India does have a few. There's about 8 companies here in in India that fall on that list. And I'm sure there are many more striving to be on that list one day. It's gone. So, I've heard it said when I moved here a couple years ago, A lot of people are telling me this is India's century. Would you agree with that?
Yes.
So if this is India's century, if this is the time when India is going to make its mark in the world, what's it going to take? We're seeing some of the signs already, right? We see unprecedented economic. When the rest of the country is in recession, we see India growing at 7 to 9%. We see a rapidly growing middle class. Many more of you graduating, starting businesses, working in companies, growing families, building your wealth, as was mentioned earlier. We see a strategically located country. You're right in the middle of Asia, which is the up-and-coming region in the world. You're 12 hours off from the US, which makes it a perfect place for capturing a lot of outsourced work. You have a great English language knowledge, which helps with doing business in the world. You have good education. Many of you are examples of that right here. A great educational institution. So these things are helping grow that opportunity. And you're dispersed all over the globe. I can't go anywhere in this world where I don't run into somebody from this great country. Right? And what does that do? It creates opportunities, because how many of you know of a relative who's got a relative somewhere outside the world that's helping create business for their business here, who's generating sales, who's helping with marketing, who's getting them into new markets? So that's a great fact that's going to continue to help change the game for India. But there's a problem. In order for India to truly change the game, we have to deal with some other factors. So let's look at some other things that are happening in the world today. Next slide. Corruption. We're all familiar with this, and there's no country that escapes the impact of corruption. But some of them have a much more difficult time with it than others. If you look at that map, red is not a good color. Okay? India currently on the Transparency Index for corruption ranks about 95 out of 182 countries polled. Now the good news is there's more than 182 countries. There's some countries that can't even be polled, they're so corrupt. Okay? But being 95 is something we definitely want to change. It's what makes doing business hard. It's what makes it not easy to do business, not easy to start a business. And it has other impacts that we'll see in a minute. Let's go to the next one. Literacy. If you can't read, it's really hard to do business. If you can't read, it's really hard to share ideas. Fortunately, the world is making great improvements in literacy, but there's still a lot of room to grow. Here you can see that India ranks about 139 out of 184. Let's go to the next one. Now, poverty is something that we're all familiar with here. And if we look at poverty across the world, it's a huge problem. And business is a great way to solve it. Because by creating jobs, we can bring people out of poverty. Today in India, 68.72% of the population live on less than $2 a day. That's a number that can be changed as we create jobs and opportunities. That's a great labor force waiting to be taught, trained, brought into the world of economy, given opportunities to earn for their families. Let's go on to the next one. This is also an important part of the ease of doing business. The ability to protect your intellectual property, the ability to protect your business, to have a level playing field. Today, India is about middle of the rankings for rule of law and the efficiency of the law. Again, a place where change can happen, where leaders like yourselves, as you graduate, as you take on jobs, as you take on government posts, as you start to take on business, have an opportunity to create change. So let's go to the next slide. We talked about the countries that right now we would consider economic leaders. They're there on the left. But if we look at the other side of this slide, we can see some of the up-and-coming countries. India being one of the many prominent and more dominant ones that are currently growing and seeing a lot of opportunity. So what needs to happen? What makes the difference between the countries on the right and the ones on the left? We go to the next slide. An author by the name of Vishal Mangalwadi wrote a book called Truth and Transformation. Talked a little bit about some of these things, and in this book he shares a couple of stories that I want to share with you. The first one is about a time when he was flying to the UK, and seated next to him was an Indian businessman that could barely speak English. And he was telling him on and on and on this whole 8-hour flight about how he too should become a businessman. He should move to the UK. He should come and start his own business and be a part of creating business. And at the time he blew him off, he brushed it off, he said, you know, this isn't even interesting to me. But he did ask him the question, he says, well, you barely speak English. How is it that it's so easy to build a business in the UK, but you're not building one here in India? And this man gave him an answer that he never forgot. But it didn't make an impact on him until later. The answer was, because there, everybody trusts you. There, everybody trusts you. Now, a few months later, he was in the Netherlands. He's attending a conference. At the break in the conference, the convener of the conference says, let's go get some milk at the local dairy. And as many of you know, the Netherlands are fairly famous for their dairy products, fairly famous for their exports. So they go walking through this gorgeous field where all the cows typically are. Everything's neat, it's clean, it's well trimmed, it's well cared for, and there's not a worker in sight. Not a single person anywhere on this farm. They get to the main office where the cows get milked and they sell the milk. And they walk inside. Not a person in sight. They walk up to the counter. There's a spigot there. They put their milk jar inside. They fill it. And then the gentleman he's with reaches up on top of the machine, pulls down a jar full of money, puts his money in the jar, takes out some change, takes his milk and walks back. And Mr. Mongawadi was floored. He said, if this had been my country, if this had been my people, the people I've been growing up with, that money would have been with us as well. He told this story in Indonesia once, and an Egyptian man started laughing. And he said, you Indians, you're so backwards. If this had been an Egyptian, we would have taken the cows too. But I want you to think for a minute, what makes a difference there? What changes the game there? You see, in the Netherlands, they don't need a salesperson to watch the money because they trust that the customers are going to do what's right. They don't have to have a bunch of people milking the cows because they've invented technology that does that. They keep the place clean and people keep coming back. But let's imagine for 1 minute that instead of taking the change, we took all the money and walked out of that room. What would the owner of the dairy then have to do? He'd have to hire a salesperson. That comes at a cost. Now who's going to pay for that? The customer. Now if the customer can't be honest, why should the owner be honest? So what's he going to start doing? He'll start putting water in the milk, right? Will affect what your behaviors are and how they affect the environment you do work in. Can we click on this, please? Next slide. Next one. Another sociologist wrote a book and talked about this idea, and he says everything a people does, the way it lives, is ultimately based on metaphysical assumptions. It's based on the beliefs that you have when you're looking at how you're going to build your career and build your business. All people and cultures have a particular model of the universe, a way they look at the world. And it does more to shape their development and what they're going to do in life than their prosperity or poverty, than any physical environment or circumstance. So all the education in the world, the best home, the best family, the best city, those all are factors. But what you believe is most important. So let's go to the next slide. Ideas produce behaviors and lifestyles that affect people, cultures, nations, and history. If you're thinking about starting a business, if you're thinking about working in a business, if you want to change the world, you need to examine those ideas. Understand that they are ultimately what changes the behavior of societies and what creates the environment in which you can change the world for the better. India, for the better. Next slide. The central premise here is that ideas have consequences. What we believe has a consequence. It turns out in our way we live, the way we run our business, how easy it becomes to run a business. We need to make sure we have the right ideas. So how do we do that? We have to evaluate the attitudes, the behaviors, the policies, the practices, the things that we do, and flow from those ideas. And we have to critique them closely, always asking one question. Are they true? Are they true? Are the things that we've believed all our lives, the things that are the underpinnings of who we are they true? Because if we want to create change, we have to question those assumptions. Let's move to the next one. In my country today and in the West, we're seeing the beginnings of decline, the symptoms of decline. Our economies are suffering. We see a lot of divisiveness in our politics. If any of you have seen any of the news coming out of my country today, you'd wonder if we're one country or two. We've had this big recession recently. And normally when we see recessions, what we normally see is a very quick recovery. And the deeper the recession, the faster the recovery. We haven't seen that this time. Instead, we see fighting and finger pointing. Whose fault is it? Why isn't it getting better? We see people trying to manage it, to maintain it. And all that comes from the ideas they hold about who we are as people and what we're capable of or not capable of. We see a constant attack and destruction of our moral compass, of the things that we hold and believe, that's changing the way we perceive and work with the world. Let's look at the next one there. So this leads me to ask 3 questions. Whenever I look at the news and I'm trying to figure out what's going on and how to keep moving my business forward and how to keep working and creating value for my family, the first question I ask, if you click on it please, why are the Europe and America seemingly in decline? What's causing it? Which leads me to 2 more questions. The first one, click please, is there only so much to go around? If India and China and Brazil are growing, does that mean that everybody else has to decline in order for them to grow? How many of you believe that that's the case? That there's only so much in the world. And so one person can have it, the other one can't. How many of you believe that? Nobody. That's good. I don't believe that either. I believe that we can continue to grow, all of us, and benefit, and make a better world for everyone. But in order to do that, then, we have to ask the next question. In America and in the West, I ask this question a lot. Could it be that we're losing sight of the things, the fundamental truths, the ideas that got us to be where we were? When you look at all those data points we showed earlier, why are those countries as successful as they are? Why are they where they're at? I believe it's because they had ideas that led to behaviors, that led to a culture and an environment like we saw in the Netherlands. So let's move to the next slide. India's at a crossroads. I've been here 2 years, and I see it every day. This country is on the verge of something great, but it could be also on the verge of losing what it's built. And the tipping point is sitting in this room. It's you. It's the students of tomorrow, or the leaders of tomorrow. The students that are graduating. You have a choice as you graduate. Will you question the basic assumptions that you've had your whole lives, that your country has had for its entire history, and look for ways to change the game, or will you continue to do what you've been doing? India just recently has gone through a number of economic setbacks. As we see a little bit of attempt to sacrifice the possibility of long-term prominence for a little bit of short-term gain. The politicians want more now. We see them grabbing for more taxes. We see them grabbing for more pieces of the success that's there. We see companies like Satyam folding because they got too greedy. But there's a great opportunity because there's a huge, huge, huge opportunity for economic growth here. And so how do we capture that? How do we build that change? And what is your role in that transformation? This book, Switch, written by a couple of guys, Chip and Dan Heath, sets a nice framework for change, something for you to think about. Change doesn't happen because we decide that it should. Change happens because people make an emotional connection with that change. Changes are emotional. People do things based on emotion. And emotion's like a giant elephant. Have any of you ever tried to ride an elephant? No? Yes? Okay. When you try to ride an elephant, who gets to decide where the elephant goes? You or the elephant? The elephant usually, right? Especially if he's upset or he gets scared. Elephant gets scared, you're not going to stop him from going where he wants to go. You're just along for the ride. Okay? Same is true with emotions. Same is true with change settings. When we work with clients in our business to help them make change, we have to acknowledge the fact that the organization has an elephant in the room. And the elephant doesn't want to change. But when the elephant gets excited or sees something that it can emotionally attach to, it rolls with it. It goes with it. And then it becomes the role of the rider, the intellect, to guide that as much as it can, to take that emotion and use it. So when you see a slide that talks about 68.72% of a population living in poverty, does that make you angry? Does it make you sad? Does it make you motivated to find a solution? Yes. Those are the emotions that drive the elephant. But then the ideas come into play. How do we create the right kinds of changes? How does the rider guide that emotion to create good solutions? To create technologies and services that can help the poor rise out of poverty, that can reduce corruption and create a better workplace for all of us. And then the third piece of accepting change is the leadership. You have to start to identify the path so that the elephant and the rider know which way to go. And you start showing them those steps, living it by example, marking out the direction that you're going to take to create that change. Next slide. This is just a small example. It's the only time I'm really going to talk about my company and our experience here in India. But when we came here to India, our goal was to make a difference. Our goal was to create a company that would start to create that change that we've just been talking about. And I believe, like I said earlier, that ideas have consequences. So the first thing we did, and what we've built the entire company around, is 4 core values. You see them there on the screen. Honesty, servanthood, stewardship, and community. And we talk about them all the time. All the time. You come in for orientation, you hear about them. You sit at your desk, they're on a mouse pad. We get together as a company and we share stories of how we're doing this in our company. How we're serving the community. How we're serving each other. How we're treating our clients with respect and being honest in every situation, even when we failed. And it makes a difference because we have employees who are dedicated to making a difference in the world. Dedicated to having fun in their jobs and doing the best work they possibly can. Knowing that if these ideas take root, they can have an impact not only in their own lives, but in the lives of everybody in their community. even in their country. Next slide. If you don't remember anything else from what we just talked about, I'd ask you to remember this. I believe this to be fundamentally true no matter what business you're in, what you do after you graduate, after you move into business, even while you're in school. Who we are is more important than what we do. All of us will find different paths and jobs and vocations, but who you are, your character, how you treat people, the way you look at life is more important than what you do. It will always be more important. The reason is that what we believe shapes what we do and how we do it. And the how we do it part is what leads to long-term change. It's easy to take shortcuts, but they only last for so long. And they may look like a good solution today, but tomorrow they'll come back. They'll cause that string of events we talked about with the milk farm, with the dairy farm. So the next slide. So how do you do that? How do you break that chain of some of those ideas that are there in the past so that you can start to create change as you move forward to the future? First thing you need to do is start questioning your assumptions. Not just asking, why do I think that, but really looking at yourself in the mirror and saying, where did that come from? And where does it take me when I think that way? Question it deeply. And then figure out, as the speaker before me mentioned, figure out what that does in terms of setting my path for the future. Who is it going to make me be? Who do I want to be? Don't take shortcuts. And then this next one, seek to do what's right. Not what's convenient or what's easy, but what's truly right. And then once you've done that, then start to look for the right things. So if it's truly right to help the poor, that's the first step. The next step is to figure out what's the best way to help them. My country has been pouring money after money after money into Africa to try to help the poor there. But it hasn't made any difference. And the reason it hasn't made any difference is because throwing money at the poor isn't going to help them. It doesn't give them jobs. It doesn't help them learn how to develop skills. It usually ends up in the wrong hands. But going in and starting a business and teaching people jobs, that makes a difference. So we have to pick the right things to do, the right business models, the right types of ideas. And the last thing there I would tell you to do is to set your moral compass. Figure out what you believe in. What is the truth that you follow? And make it the center of everything you do. Next slide. So ask yourself this question. What truth guides you? Go ahead and next one. Now if you're going to lead the change, if you're going to be a leader in bringing change about, you need to not be afraid to lead change. It's very easy as a young person to be intimidated, to be told you need to spend 15 years figuring it out. But if you're bold, and if you believe in change, and you believe in what you're going to, in the things that you can accomplish, there's no reason to be afraid to lead. You can be respectful. You can find ways to do that and work with others. But don't be afraid to step up and bring your ideas to the table. We need them. Someone mentioned earlier that there's more youth in India, right, than people in the United States. That's a lot of ideas. That's a lot of leadership. But you have to not be afraid to use it. You need to be prepared. Don't take the shortcuts in school. Don't take the shortcuts in getting the experience when you have opportunities to work with others. Find good mentors. Find people with experience. Ask questions. And remember that change is a long-term proposition. If any of you think you're going to be successful and create big change tomorrow, 1 in a million of you may, but most of you won't. You have to have a long-term view if you want to change the world. And then the last thing